Although foster care was scary, it was also the thing that changed my life forever. In my last video, I talked a lot about my life before foster care and as I went into foster care, how I was malnourished and underdeveloped as a child and didn't really know what normal was. What kid really does at the age of 5, really? But um, I know my life wasn't normal. Although it was one of the most difficult times in my life, I know that it was the best thing to happen to me. There's a few things that I remember when I was in my younger ages in foster care between the ages of like 5 to 12. I remember one of the first times I felt a sense of family and safety was when I walked into a room full of complete strangers. You're probably thinking to yourself, how is that possible? Well, you see, my mom was in AA, and she is to this day. And if you've never been to an AA meeting, what you experience when you go to one is a group of adults that are facing their addiction, their life experiences, and some of the most challenging stories that you've ever heard. And as a young kid, between the age of 5 to 8, 10 years old, I remember going into this room full of strangers, coffee, some snacks, but everyone sitting together and sharing their life with honesty, humility, and accountability. And that really stuck with me. As I've gotten older and thought back to those younger ages, that's not normal, but that's had a lasting impact, I truly believe, on how I view life. And I remember my mom would also share often. And here I am, this young kid sitting on her lap, and not only sharing her addiction with alcohol, but where she was with her current life. And she said that we were a gift, another reason to stay sober, another reason to show up to these meetings and help mentor others that were going through common challenges. To this day, one of my best friends that I look up to at that time was a friend of my mom's. And she had a story where she was in AA and she was battling giving up her kids to take care of herself and go on the journey of sobriety. And here she's sitting next to my mom that's telling a story of how she's adopted 2 children and going through the journey of sobriety. And the reason why I say that is because my mom was the light, a light in the room. People looked up to her, listened to her, and leaned in when she told her stories. Everyone did. I also remember the Boys and Girls Club, and it had a big impact on my younger age because that was the first time I started to really develop social skills. I still remember feeling really isolated, but I remember all of the adults and the volunteers back then being so invested in the children. A lot of the times, these were children that didn't have a lot of attention, development or were poor. And I remember still, even in that setting, not feeling a sense of normalcy. I still felt isolated. But those were baby steps that helped me develop into a young boy. The activities, the sports, it really challenged me to put myself into an environment where I could interact with other children, but it still wasn't normal for me. And then I really remember the relationship that I started to build with video games during that time. And that might be kind of weird to hear, but video games for a kid with that much trauma and to exposure to all the things that I experienced was my way of disconnecting. You know, it was an environment where I could virtually go into whatever game I was playing and I controlled the narrative, whether it was a shooting game where I had the ability to shoot the bad guys, where I could choose where I wanted to go in that game and what I wanted to do. I controlled my environment. And as I got older, I remember my relationship with video games turned more into just a disconnect. But I've always had a deep relationship with video games. It turned into something that I also started to really enjoy and became competitive at. But there's always been this sense of I could lean on video games because they were always there for me. And there was always a safe place for me. Now, as I've gotten older, of course, I've been able to create a much more stable relationship with video games where, um, I understand there's more important things in life, like spending time with my family, with my kids, responsibilities with employment, with education. But even to this day, anytime that I have a video game that I really enjoy, it's a passion that I can't necessarily put into words on how it makes me feel. But it's always been an important piece of my childhood, and that's carried on into my adulthood. Now, the early stages from the age of 5 to 12 were a lot of me figuring out what it meant to be a kid. And now I think any kid can technically say that, but I'm talking about a kid that didn't speak up until the age of 8 years old or barely communicated. The kid that was called the hungry kid because I would eat small increments and get so full and then be hungry again just because of the repetition that I had with eating small servings or what was available to me before foster care, to becoming a young boy and developing into my later years from the age of 12 to 18. And when you go through a childhood like I did, some things that you realize is you have severe abandonment issues, you have severe trust issues, and for who I am today, there's so many good reasons, excuses that I could say why I could have chosen to go down the same path that I did or that I grew up in. but why I refused not to is because I got to see firsthand how terrible it was. And I got to hear firsthand everyone sharing how they were trying to break that mold for themselves in AA. The next video that I'm going to create is going to be between the ages of 12 and 18. And in that video, I'm going to talk a lot more about how I struggled in school, how it took me a long time to find purpose into being able to even focus on something in the outside world, and what really created my passion to want to create a foundation for myself to be successful, which has continued to change, of course, throughout my adulthood, and also find fulfillment into being in the workforce and the adversities that I've faced as a young adult that's helped me become who I am today.